Hi everyone. This video is a highly anticipated devlog about a Scratch project I've been working on for a while. It's called School Shenanigans, and it's a Mario Party-inspired game about a middle schooler named Adrian and his acquaintances as they work together to survive their new classes, which have suddenly become a lot more crazier than they already were, even though it hasn't even been 2 weeks since the start of the school year. There are going to be a ton of mini-games, just like in Mario Party. They're basically the backbone of the game, alongside story mode, and some of them represent typical school situations, but, humorously exaggerated. For example, there's the hall sweep minigame, where you and your friends have to evade the hall monitors for as long as possible. There's also going to be a dodgeball minigame, a lunch battle minigame, and maybe even a slope-inspired math minigame that plays like the popular Y8 arcade game, but, well, more mathy. And hey, there might even be a Mario Party-style board game mode, and of course, like every Mario Party game, there's multiplayer. You, your friends, and some other classmates can connect a game controller to someone's laggy school Chromebook and procrastinate your math homework away together. No friends? No problem. You can play with CPUs. The whole game, or at least the bulk of it, was inspired by my own experiences with middle school, except I never got caught in a hall sweep, or witnessed a food fight, or played dodgeball, or... But I didn't create this video to grieve about what I missed out on in school. I wanted to explain what's been changed since my last devlog. I mean, if you want to even call those videos devlogs. But anyway, what are we waiting for? Grab your number, 2 pencils, and let's fill in the blanks. The first thing I want to show off is the main menu. Yeah, I know, I just roasted my other devlogs for only showing off the main menu and a few tiny changes. But this time, it actually got a major overhaul. Well, kinda. For starters, instead of the game just dropping you straight into the menu with the logo on top, there's now a full splash screen. It features an AI-generated placeholder background of a school hallway behind the 4 main characters, Adrian, Julian, Michael, and Jesse. At the bottom, players are given 2 options. Play with a keyboard, which is limited to 1 player, or play with a gamepad, which supports up to 4 players. If you have at least 1 gamepad plugged in, an indicator will show how many are currently connected. When you select an option, a checkmark will appear next to it. If you choose the gamepad option, you'll first see a configuration screen before heading to the main menu. The player in control can use the left and right bumpers to adjust the number of human players. Then, each player uses the left joystick to select what type of controller they're using, to make sure everything works smoothly. Right now, the game only supports certain gamepads like PlayStation and Xbox controllers. Nintendo Switch controllers are technically allowed, but depending on your connection method, or how you're using the Joy-Cons, there's no guarantee they'll work properly. Oh, and multiple people can log into the GameJolt API in a single session, but playtime will only count for the main player. Each player gets their own colorful panel with a ready status once they're locked in. You'll also see their name and controller type displayed clearly, so everyone knows who's who. As for the main menu itself, it's way better now. The previous version had a flat, minimal look that resembled an early FNF fan game, functional but unpolished. Plus, the button design copied Project Diva a bit. The new menu, while still a work in progress, feels much more refined with vibrant visuals, clear navigation, and bigger panels for the main modes that give it a more engaging presentation. And now, with that out of the way, let's get to the good stuff. If you're a fan who loves watching cool people make cool stuff in Desmos, this kind of thing, then you might have come across this video. This is Math Final Boss, a Desmos graph created by Jake Walker for the Desmos 2023 Global Math Art Contest. It was made entirely in Desmos, and he even made a video about how it was made. Kind of like the video you're watching now. Speaking of which, if you've been subbed to my channel for the past 3 months, you might have seen 2 of my more recent uploads. They're full gameplays of 2 story mode boss battles that I put a lot of work into and felt really proud of, so I shared them early, especially the one against the math teacher. The one with the creature that looks a lot like that Desmos graph. That boss battle was totally inspired by it. Back in November 2024, YouTube randomly recommended the video to me again, and I thought, no cap, this would actually make a fire boss fight. Imagine the cutscene starts with your teacher typing 9 plus 10 divided by 0 on the chalkboard. And then the calculator transforms into that thing, and she rides it with a prismatic sword. And thus, Ms. Javanova's final form was born. Oh, and small side note, the boss battle was my entry for Griff Patch's Ultimate Scratch Game Jam. Did I win? Nope. Did I even get mentioned? Also, nope. It probably didn't get enough loves to get noticed by Griffpatch, but that won't stop me from being grateful for all the support the demo got when I released it. A lot of you said I deserved to win. And a lot of you even said you wanted to know how this was made, which was the main focus of the devlog, to explain how I turned a Desmos graph into a true final boss. First, I'm going to explain how I created the basic engine for the story mode bosses. And for that, we're going to have to start with the other boss battle, the one featuring the robotics teacher, Mr. Meanie, because that's the fight I was working on when I built the core engine. Now Mr. Meanie's fight isn't as flashy as Ms. Javanova's, but it's super important because it laid the groundwork for how all the boss fights are structured. Think of it like the prototype, the crash test dummy of boss fights. This is where I figured out how to handle stuff like enemy attack patterns, player movement and inputs, and hit detection. But even before any of that, I had to set up a few key systems that the whole boss engine depends on. The first was the health bar system, which thankfully was the easy part. I based it on Griffpatch's Health Bars Reimagined tutorial, and then customized it to fit my own needs. Then came the real challenge, building a 3D-ish field of view system. Basically, I wanted a fake 3D effect, where objects scale up or down depending on their Z position to give the illusion of depth. In some of my earlier platforming projects, I used the classic scrolling method where the sprite goes to object coordinates minus camera coordinates, which works fine for 2D. I added a basic 2.5D perspective by multiplying coordinates by a camera Z variable, usually set to 1, so things kind of scaled, but it wasn't realistic at all. Here's the problem in math terms. I was scaling objects based on their Z depth, using a formula like size equals base size times Z, where Z was a value between 0 and infinity, depending on how far the object was from the camera. Where 1 is normal, 2 is closer, 0.5 is farther, and 0 equals, well, just gone. That sort of feels like perspective. Objects shrink as Z gets smaller. But it's not how perspective works in real life. If an object moves toward the camera by a constant amount each frame, say increasing Z by 1 every frame, then 1 times Z increases slower and slower as Z gets smaller. For example, going from Z equals 9 to Z equals 10 increases the size by about 1.1 times. But going from Z equals 1 to Z equals 2 doubles it. So yeah, it's nonlinear, but in the wrong direction. It starts fast, then suddenly slows at the end. But in realistic 3D perspective, as something gets closer, its apparent size increases faster the closer it gets. That's what creates the illusion of depth and speed. You don't want linear growth. You want exponential or reciprocal scaling. Instead of multiplying by Z, real projection uses something closer to scale equals focal length divided by Z plus offset, where objects speed up visually as they approach. That creates that nice smooth whoosh feeling when something flies toward the screen. After discovering Obvious Alex C's custom 3D math extension for Penguin Mod, I realized how much better a more accurate projection could look. I wanted to recreate that effect in Virtual Scratch without any extensions. At one point, I even thought I'd need logarithms because I just learned how to use them to set audio speed based on pitch. I spent 30 minutes screen recording myself trying to figure it out using ChatGPT, but my phone deleted the file from my Google Drive. So, eventually I figured out a super clean formula that nailed the perspective scaling without needing extensions. That part nearly cooked my brain. But once I got it working, it became the backbone of the visual style for every boss. Anyway, after that mess was programming the boss entities. Now usually, for entities, I would make a clone for each individual one and assign them their own variables. But this time, I was going to take a different approach, and that was stamping. Instead of using clones, in case the number of entities ever exceeded the 300 clone limit, I would draw the entities using the stamp block from Scratch's built-in pen extension. This would allow me to not only draw as many entities as I wanted, but also allow for animating a specific part of an entity without affecting the rest of the visual aspects of the entity or creating a bunch of new clones for different parts of the entity. But that would also mean I'd have to store every entity's data in a single list because, well, no clones. So I made a system that used just one giant list to hold all the data. Each entity takes up a fixed number of slots in the list. Let's say 10 items per entity. So if I had 3 entities, the list would have 30 items. To make it work, I used a variable called C, which keeps track of where each entity's data starts. It starts at 1, then adds 10 each time. Then, within that chunk of 10 items, each index has a specific purpose. During each game loop, I'd loop through the list using a repeat block. that processes one entity at a time by increasing C by 10 each time, using those values to control what gets drawn and how it behaves. That's how I made my own RAM in Scratch. Pray for me. And after that was the checking for danger system. So here's the problem. Since I was using the stamp block instead of clones, I couldn't rely on Scratch's built-in touching detection to check if players were hit by an attack. I could with the touching color block, but it would lag like crazy, especially with all the extra graphics being stamped every frame. So instead, I made a separate list just for danger points. Basically, a list that stores the hitbox data for every attack or harmful object on screen. Each time an entity attacks, it doesn't just stamp a cool animation. It also adds danger points into a list. Then, every frame, each player checks if they're close enough to one of those points to take damage. That's way faster than checking for color collisions, and it means the entire hit detection system runs behind the scenes in raw math instead of visuals. The last part of the main engine was programming the helper CPUs. In every boss battle, you and up to 3 other classmates team up to take down your chaotic teachers. But let's be real. Not everyone has 3 friends on standby ready to plug in controllers on a school night. That's where the CPUs come in. I had to write AI logic so your teammates could actually help in battle. And yeah, it was painful. See, each boss is different. Some require dodging time patterns. Others need to throw stuff or hold up mirrors at the right time. That meant I couldn't just copy-paste the same CPU logic everywhere. Every fight needed its own specific behaviors. And I had never coded AI before. So, yeah, it was hell. So instead of walking you through that cursed journey, I'm just gonna skip it. Pretend I did a good job. Thanks. And after all that madness, we finally had our first real boss battle. Now, if you're looking at it and thinking, hey, isn't this kind of like the N-Gin fight from Crash Bandicoot 2? Yeah, but that was kind of an accident. Only difference is you're not hurling infinite Wumpa fruit at the robot. That gimmick is reserved for another boss down the line. So now, with the main engine finally complete and the first boss battle in the bag, I can start working on the next bosses for story mode. Naturally, you'd expect me to go in order, right? Hell no! I immediately skipped to the final boss, Ms. Javanova. Why? Because I was on a deadline for Griffpatch's Game Jam, and I thought the final boss concept I had in mind would sweep the competition. Anyway, I've hyped this boss up long enough, so without further ado, let's dive into the thought process behind the battle with the ultimate math menace, Ms. Javanova. Now, before I could program the boss, I had to draw the boss. I've already mentioned that the design was inspired by the creature from Jake Walker's Desmos graph, so I won't go too deep into that again. Basically, I used a screenshot of the graph as a reference and traced the different elements into separate SVG costumes using the paint editor. Quick side note, don't trace other people's artwork and claim it as your own. I didn't do that. I made sure to credit the inspiration properly. As a bonus, I added Ms. Javanova herself, standing dramatically atop the creature. I even drew multiple costumes for her to spice things up visually, including a dizzy animation for the midpoint of the second half of the battle, just for that extra flair. For the background, I wanted to blend 2 very specific vibes: the icy cavern levels from Crash Bandicoot 2 and the electric temple arena from the pure electro hypostasis boss in Genshin Impact. Coming up with the final background design was tough, but I finally settled on this wall structure. And because I love a good dramatic reveal, I decided that after the first phase of the fight, the wall would explode, revealing the original graph-inspired background underneath as a tribute to the boss's roots. The stars in the background were randomly generated using even more giant lists, and the points of the cliff that the players stand on were also randomly generated, just like in the original graph. I drew it with a lightning-fast triangle filler I stole, permanently borrowed, from another Scratcher. The cutscenes were created using timer blocks with more stamped costumes for convenience. And since syncing multiple sounds in Scratch is difficult, I recorded the cutscenes, added the sounds in CapCut, and exported the result as an MP3 file. So now, with all the initial setup out of the way, I could finally dive into programming the boss itself. For the first phase, titled Pythagorean Paradigm, the black hole behind the creature begins spawning triangular icicles that come above the players' heads, and the players will have to dodge them when they start falling. I named the phase Pythagorean Paradigm as a math pun, despite the icicles being equilateral triangles, not right triangles, so the Pythagorean theorem technically doesn't apply. Originally, I wanted falling right triangle slopes and rectangles that the players would climb to reach the creature. But physics coding on Scratch is a pain, so that idea got the boot. You might also notice that the creature retreats into its hole just before the icicles drop. That little touch was inspired by the nameless deity boss from modded Terraria, the same one that inspired Jake Walker's graph I based the boss on. I only got around to watching the actual boss fight after nearly finishing this phase, and realized I had unintentionally mirrored several ideas, including the line, "Your final test begins," that Ms. Javanova will sometimes say at the start. Like seriously, how does my brain do this by accident? After the falling icicles, the game suddenly seems to flatten into a grid, and that's when groups of spikes start bursting out of the ground. This part was clearly inspired by the infamous triple spikes from Geometry Dash. As the phase progresses, the spike patterns become more randomized, forcing players to time their jumps carefully to avoid getting impaled. Remember when I talked, probably a bit too much, about how I made those 3D perspective blocks? That flattening effect was achieved by applying a multiplier to the Z reporter that smoothly transitions from 1 to 0. I also made a few tweaks to certain elements, like the background, to keep the illusion consistent. Looking back, I probably should have added more reaction time before the spikes popped up. But hey, it is the final boss after all. I also wish the spikes were more visible beneath the text background, but at this point, it is what it is. After that phase, the creature's shield temporarily drops, and it starts floating around while more icicles fall from the sky. Now, players can throw calculators at the creature using the space key to fend it off. This phase is similar to, but not inspired by, the carrot phase in Cuphead's Root Pack boss battle. As your team pelts the creature with calculators, you'll notice the infinity symbol on its body begins to unravel, like it's being erased by an invisible whiteboard wiper. Once the symbol disappears completely, the creature drifts toward the players and stops in front of the cliff, marking the end of the first phase and the start of one of 2 intermissions in the fight. During this intermission, you and your friends must interact with 4 bubbles that suddenly begin circling the creature while it slowly repairs the infinity symbol. Each time a bubble is popped, the player who popped it has 10 seconds to answer the question that appears. Answer correctly and the creature's healing slows down. Answer incorrectly and it gains more health. If time runs out, nothing happens. Then the wall explodes like mentioned before, and 3 neon panels of Java Nova script, aka Ms. Javanova's JavaScript-themed code, appear in front of the creature, each controlling a neon chain peg that the players must avoid. It first swings side to side, so the players must jump over it. Then it rotates in full circles, forcing players to dodge or time their movements. Then the peg slides across the floor while the spiky ball bounces between sides. After clearing the panels, the hypostasis moves in a tangent wave-like pattern, and the players can now throw calculators to deal damage again. This section wasn't inspired by anything specific, it just seemed like a fun idea and a nod to my love for coding. The rest plays out much like the previous sequence, so I'll skip ahead to the next part. This part is probably the most majestic moment in the entire boss battle. The players are suddenly sucked into the black hole and confronted by a giant eye surrounded by glowing integral signs. Amazing how just adding a faint glow can make something look breathtaking, right? Anyway, after giving you only a couple of seconds to take it in, the eye starts teleporting at random, firing lasers and summoning portals that unleash spinning integrals. Every so often, it launches scatter plots, small dots that arrange themselves into mathematical symbols like pi, before exploding after a short delay. Players don't even need to wait for an opening. They can start hurling calculators right away. Just plant your thumb on the spacebar and go wild. This part was the only section directly inspired by the original boss battle, after I thought I had already wrapped up this fight. The integral tornado was created by arranging a bunch of integrals that spun at preset speeds. Some rotated a little faster than others, depending on how far they were from the eye, creating a polyrhythmic effect that's like a visual nod to chaos theory. As for the scatter plots, I actually had to create an entirely separate Scratch project just to manage the lists for the symbol dot maps. The main boss project was already handling so many entities and calculations that adding all the scatter plot data on top of it would have caused serious lag, so separating it made everything more manageable and kept the performance smooth. In the final phase, the black hole stops surrounding the players, but then it starts vacuuming them in, forcing everyone to throw calculators at its center to clog the suction. players can use the arrow keys to escape if they get pulled in. For this part, I had to create a new death animation for when a player gets sucked up, including a bunch of fisheye and whirl effects to sell the chaos. Once the vacuum is clogged, a cutscene plays showing the black hole sputtering like a real vacuum and ejecting Ms. Javanova in the hypostasis, humorously covered in calculators. But did you really think that was the end?
You're an idiot!
No, that is not the end. So now, Adrian and the crew are ganging up on Ms. Javanova, who's already madder than a calculator with no batteries, when suddenly Percival nearly gives Ms. Javanova a heart attack, and then Kendall waltzes in like it's her live stream debut. Ms. Javanova is losing it faster than a denominator approaching zero, right when things are about to calm down, but not really. Her creature goes full-on Super Saiyan mode. Woo! So now, the players are launched into the epic final phase, where Ms. Javanova's creature whips up a full-on tornado and floods the arena with question bubbles. This time, instead of the usual 4 characters, everyone must team up in pairs to control Percival and Kendall as they blast their way through the chaos. Players 1 and 3 handle the aiming of Percival's and Kendall's cannons, while players 2 and 4 mash the action button to fire. If only one person is playing, they'll be stuck piloting Percival alone, while the CPUs are about as useful as wet cardboard. Yeah, I gotta fix that sometime soon. Halfway through the phase, a new twist comes in. Bubbles with snowflakes start drifting in alongside the question bubbles. If they reach the players, they restore health, unless someone accidentally blasts them with a calculator meant for a question bubble, in which case, congrats, you've just shot your only healing item. I went with snowflakes partly because they match the environment the battle takes place in, but mostly because, well, school nurses always say the same thing. Oh God, my friend just collapsed with a heart attack in the middle of the room!
Just put some ice on it, sweetie.
Once Ms. Javanova is worn out, the creature stumbles a bit, sending whoever hasn't already been sent flying. The main characters then take the initiative to seal the deal for real. In this phase, the training wheels are completely gone. All players are responsible for both aiming and firing their cannons, forcing full coordination and leaving no room for lazy button mashing. When it's all over at last, it ends the same way you originally thought it would end. This part of the boss battle, while fun to program, was also kind of tedious. Not only did I have to perfect the aiming code so that the cannons felt responsive instead of slippery, but I also had to crank out a whole set of costumes for the different frames of the spin tornado. Well, okay, not these ones. These particular frames I shamelessly stole from Google. I also maybe made the difficulty spike way too sharp. I'll probably need to tone it down later, but hey, sometimes chaos is part of the charm. And with that, the final boss is finally behind us, and the battle is officially over. Looking back, this fight was easily one of the most complex and rewarding parts of the project. From the crazy tornado phases to the layered teamwork mechanics, every part pushed the engine and my own patience to the limit. I learned a ton about balancing chaos and fairness, fine-tuning controls, and making sure players feel challenged but not completely overwhelmed. Even the small touches, the glowing integrals, the snowflake heals, and the dramatic cutscenes added a lot of character and made all the late nights worth it. In short, it was a ton of work, but seeing it all come together makes me proud and excited for what's next. Honestly, making this devlog turned out to be its own massive project. I spent basically a year putting it together. Yeah, a whole year. That even includes 4 months I spent working on something completely different before ultimately scrapping it and starting over from scratch. Every clip, every explanation, every chaotic mid-sentence tangent was part of building this thing into something that actually felt like a proper behind-the-scenes look at school shenanigans. That said, I'm going to be taking a break from development on school shenanigans for now, at least until I'm not stuck using my brother's PC, which I've had to rely on all year for reasons that are, well, my own. But don't worry, I've got a ton of new ideas and plans cooking in the meantime, so stay tuned. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Adrian behind an AI voice, signing out.